Boker Tov, Shavua Tov. Today's stop is Daf Mem in Gitin, as we learned for Shlomo for Ben Ruben, Yosef, Shiur, and Chaim Michal. From the last line on Lamed Testament days, Amar Zera Chanina Rashi Amar Rebbe, Evet Shenosas Baschorin, and Evet Kanani, who marries a Baschorin, which he cannot really do that. And Evet Kanani cannot marry a Baschorin. It wouldn't even be, Baschorin means a regular Jewess. The Kedushin would be Chal. The Fnei Rabba in front of his master, Yotze L'Cheres. He goes out free. On the side, he brings down V'lo Odel Shekofenes Rabba because of Rabba Shtar Shechra. Okay, that's what on the side he says that, but it's much from Rashi that he already freed him. In other words, if he got married in front of his master and his master said nothing, he didn't say anything. It's mashma. He says he goes out free. Why? Because Rashi says the ilav the shachrei had not been that he already freed him. He wouldn't have allowed him to do that. He wouldn't have allowed him to commit a sin like that, and it wouldn't work unless he must have freed him already. So that's proof, according to this sheet of Rabbi, that he already freed him already. This is such a big chiddush you have in your hand. In other words, Rabbi said that, and I learned the other way around. Even if a man himself, the master, writes a shtar erison, man, you can get married with kesef shtar or bia. He writes her shtar erison, I'm married to you, I take you for a wife, and she agrees. Rav Meir says, yes, she's mukadeshes. Why? Because the assumption is that he freed her already, or that this act itself is saying, I'm freeing you. So you say that if a Eved marries a Baschorin in front of his master, it's a sign, it's proof that he already freed him. Here we see, according to Chachamim, that even if he himself married a Shifra, the master himself married a Shifra, she's not married. How could you say that if the Eved married in front of the master, it's a right that he freed him, and this is not a proof that he freed him? In other words, when he himself married a Shifra Knanis, which doesn't work, he writes her, and he married her with this, Racham say that's not even a marriage, and you don't assume that it's a sign that he must have freed her before. And the answer is, could Amar Rabba Bar Rav Shila, the answer of Rav Yochanan was is that we're going to say in a few minutes, but in a different case, if a master, if his master did some act to show that he's a free person, to show that the evidence is free, for example, he put on tefillin. Tefillin are, even though women can wear tefillin, they're patur from tefillin, and normally an Evikani only has mitzvahs that a woman has. So he wouldn't normally spend time putting on tefillin, and his master wouldn't allow that. If the master put on tefillin on, that's a sign that he must have freed him already. He's a free person. This is speaking about the case that Rebbe was speaking about, where the master married him off. He took him to the chuppah, so to speak. He married him off. He married this woman for him. He said, "Here, I married you." He gave him the ring, or in this case, he gave him a star, and he gave him a ring or a star, and he said, marry him. So there it's different. There we see that the master clearly had freedom. So I understand. So if you did some sign showing that he's free by, for example, the master marrying him off to the woman, that shows that he freed him already. He wouldn't do Isura. In other words, he wouldn't have married off the Evet Kanani to a Baschorin unless he had freed him already. So he was a regular Jew. He wouldn't have done an Isur. The Iyuv of Isura. So how could you say in this case the Chacham say in the case that Rabbi Yochanan quoted that if he writes a shtar erison to his shifra knanis, Rav Meir says it's a kedushin. Chacham say it's not a kedushin. Why? I mean, if he wouldn't have freed her, that means he's doing an Isser. You can't marry a Shifra Knanis. A Jewish person cannot marry a Shifra Knanis. So he's saying if he took his Evet Knani and he married her off, and he married him off to a Jewish woman, it's a proof since he took he made the marriage, he made the whole simcha. He was the shatchen and the unterfir, everything. He did the whole thing and paid for it. If he did it, then he wouldn't have done an Isser. He must have freed. That's a sign of freedom. But if the master himself married a Shifra Knanis, you say, no, it's not a marriage. He didn't free her. How does that make sense? I'm not my skin into Amrullah. Here's what happened. He told her like this. He gave her a shtar of kedushin. Remember, how do you marry a woman? Harei mukadeshes li, but tabat zo o b'shtar zo kedas Moshe v'Yisrael. he said to her, right? He said to her, Seiba Viskachiba, when he gave her the star itself said Arayat Mukadeshesli, like any other star, like any other getting married with a ring, whatever. But when he gave it to her, he said, Seibo, go out, get your freedom, Viskachibo, and get married with it too. Rav Meir Shapiro, Yesh Lashon Hazeh Lashon Shiur. Arayat Mukadeshesli also means, it's your freedom. You're free. In other words, get yourself, be free and be enabled to marry me, meaning get your freedom and also marry me. Take a look at Rashi. Rashi in the lines get narrow, a couple lines down in the narrow lines. See what was Kashibo Klomar. If he tells her, listen, just like when his slave married a free woman under his jurisdiction, right? He was in charge there. We say he must have freed him before to allow it to happen. Here too, if he would have just told it when the master himself marries his slave woman, he just said, "Marry me." He's certainly freed her before Mikara. But now that he said, he didn't just. If he would have just said, "Oh, here's your marriage certificate. Please get married to me." It obviously it's a sign that he must have granted her freedom before. How did he grant her freedom? How do you get freedom from? How does an Eved Kanani he must get freedom? Either by a star, like a get. That's what we're talking about here, a get shiur of some sort, or by money. It could be, somebody could buy him off, or he or she, if they had their own money, can buy off their own freedom if they agree to a price, like we learned yesterday, right? According to Rav Shimon. Rav Shimon says only a star. Rav Shimon says only a star. We said at the end of yesterday's daf, we don't pass like Rav Shimon, either a star or money. But over here, so the question is, when this man, the master, allowed his slave to marry a free woman, it's a sign that he must have given him a shiur before. Here too, the question is, when the master himself marries a slave woman, why do the Rabbanan say so good? If he would have just said, "Be Makudish to me," yes, that's assumed that, like Rashi says, that's a sign that he must have given her freedom before. Aval Hashta, says Rashi, Aval Hashta the Omer Law. Now he says to her, Seibo Viskachibo. He says, go out with this and be married to me with the same document. And this should function as both things, both as a writ of freedom and a marriage certificate. Gali Milsa Delo Shichra, shows he didn't free her before. He's saying, Seibo, go out with this. I'm giving you a star. Here's your marriage. Like, here's your. We just can't give her money. Money itself wouldn't work. She's bought out. Give him. But let's say he gave her the star Erison, and he said to her, use this as your get shiur and as your Erison. Rav Meir Shapiro going on Rashi and said, Yesh b'lashon Harei Mukadeshesli lashon shiur. Harei Mukadeshesli means, get married to me, and also get freed. Be free and be married to me. Be fit to marry me and be married with this. Whereas Rabbanan say, no. Had he just said, get married to me, so we would have understood that means to me, get married to me, he must have freed her before, because otherwise you couldn't marry her. If he just said Iskachibo, body, as Rashi says, body shiur mikara. But now, when he says, be freed with this and marry me with this, it shows that he didn't free her before, because he says, be freed with this. And this is not a document of freedom. It says, marry me. It doesn't say anything about freedom. The lashon of what has to be written in a get shiur in a writ of freedom for an eved is not so clear, right? But it's got to be some lashon of, I'm giving you your freedom. You're free to go. I don't own you anymore. Whatever he wrote in there, but it's got to be some shashechah. Marry me. The words "marry me," according to Rabbanan, that doesn't give her freedom. Again, if he would have just said "marry me," we would have, and that's all he said, then we would have assumed, when he said marry me, he must have freed her before. But if he says, be freed and marry me with this document, and all this document says, Harei Mukadeshesli, Rav Meir says it means that too. But the Chacham say it doesn't, and that's why it doesn't work over here. And that's what Rabbi Yochanan said, that a Kosav Shtar Eres L'Shib Chasar, Meir Mukdesh, the Chacham say no, it's not conditioned, because he meant to say, get freed with this document, and this is not a document of freedom. It's going to see about discussion about Rav Meir Shapiro, Yesh b'lashon Hazeh lashon shiur, back at the Gemara. Rabbanan Savi, Ein b'lashon Hazeh lashon shiur. I'm Rabbi Shubin Levi, back at the Gemara, about 10 lines down. Let's say an Eved put on tefillin in front of his Rebbe. Now that's a sign. An Eved wouldn't normally do that. As we said, an Eved doesn't, not chayv, it's tefillin you don't wear at night and on Shabbos, so it's a mitzvah seishes man grama. And Eved Kanani would not normally wear tefillin. Eved, yes, he's a full Jew. Eved Kanani would not. So if he put on tefillin in front of his master, he goes out free. He goes out free. How does he go out free? Basically, just putting on tefillin, what does that do? The answer is it shows that his master already freed him before. Meisvei, what do you mean? Love him, man, Rabbo. Let's say his master borrowed money from him, treated him like an equal. I'm borrowing money from you. His master made him a guardian over some children, over some assets, or whatever. Or he put on tefillin in front of his Rebbe, what we're talking about. He got an aliyah in shul, he gave him an aliyah. In front of the master, all these things with Rabbo, that's not a sign of freedom. Just because he did those things, okay, it's a little bit of a chutzpah. He treated him nicely, borrowed money from him, I'll pay you back, heter iska, apotropos, whatever. I'll do all those things, right? He did all those things in front of his master, but it's not a sign of freedom. So how do you say if you put on tefillin as a sign of freedom? Rav Shapiro, this is what we referred to before. The Gemara over here in the fourth line on this very same page referred to this Rav Shapiro. It's speaking about where his master put on his tefillin. His master put on his tefillin. That's a sign that he gave him his freedom. Otherwise, he wouldn't have him wear tefillin. It's not. So if it's instead of, well, what? No, it's not instead of. It's a sign that he already gave him tefillin. Ain't there ever Rashi says when he has tefillin, mesashes on grummy. That's a sign that he already gave him. That he already gave him a get. That's what he means. Well, the get was given before. That's no, he threw it out. What's the difference? It's a sign that he gave him a get. And as if he gave him, that's a sign that he gave him a get. That's not that putting on tefillin itself is not a get shichur, and it's not money. So he can get money for it. It's a sign that he gave him. That's what Rashi learns. Vade shichur mikara. It's a sign that he already gave him his freedom. Right? Guess Rav Dimi Amar Bechne said Misha Mavshas Bisaso. Now we get into this question again of how do you grant freedom to an Eviknani or Shifra? Same thing would be. So he said it has to be with a get, or if he buys himself out, somebody buys him out. So when Dimi came back, so he said, a man said when he was dying, Plonis Shifrasi, this nice Shifra, she treated me nicely, the way they all talk about when they die with the Filipino was so nice. Al Yishtaduba La'acher Mosi. Don't enslave her after I die. That's what he's lashon, enslave, not what? Kofas Yoshim, we force the Yoshim because we get shukr, to try to get shukr. That lashon itself, you don't free. Just saying you're freed does not do it. He could change his mind, and he didn't really say. He just said, "Don't enslave her after I die." So he said, "You know what? Kofas we force the Yoshim to give her a get shukr." Okay, because he showed that he wanted to die, so it's the mitzvah to Mekayim the mess, and he's free. Amar lefanav Rabami V'ras Rabami said in front of Rabbi Yochanan, Rebbe, Yeta Moshe ben Abd. I don't understand. All he said was, don't enslave her. That means don't work her too hard. But if you grant her freedom, you're going to lose all her children. Her children would normally be slaves. We need some more workers over here. It's tough to get workers. So why do you say over here that you shouldn't? You say the al yishtab is not a lashon of shechur. It's not a lashon of hefker. Elay trechua. If he said like I'm mashachri, so you could say it means like he's mafker. We learned the other day that if you're mafker, you're ever said a mafker abdo yatz l'cheres. He goes out free if you made him hefker, meaning you don't own him anymore. The lashon itself does that if you do that. It's another way to get freedom, but does it do the whole thing? We'll see. Rabbi Yatamar, I mean, he didn't grant your freedom. He didn't say you're free. He just said, don't work her too hard. He said, Rabbi Yochanan didn't say it like that. He said, she gave me a lot of satisfaction. She treated me nicely. She served me, etc. You should also give her satisfaction. Treat her nicely. You force the Yoshim to treat her nicely. And treat her nicely means make her satisfied. Rashi says, if you can't satisfy her without freeing her, then you free her. But the father didn't instruct her to free her. Again, the first lashon of Rav Dimi was sound like this. He said, don't enslave her. That means apparently meant that you should free her. And you make it don't you enslave her. That means that the father indicated he wants you to give her a get. So he didn't say I'm after her, but he told his kids, when I die and you take her over, don't enslave her. That means that you should give her a get. Okay, that means mitzvah time to bring messes. We'll see. So you should do. The kids did that. Rav Meir says he didn't say you should give her a freedom. All he said was don't work her too hard. Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda certainly said that. He said she's been nice to me. You should be nice to her. If being nice to her means she needs her freedom because otherwise she won't be satisfied, so then do it. Kofan as Yorshim most like my time, a mitzvah time to bring mess. It's a mitzvah to fulfill the wishes of the dying person. Okay, so here we get into this question of if a man on his if he said I grant you freedom, or he gave her a get shechur, right? Or they bought themselves out, fine, then you're free. But the question over here is when he said this ambiguous lashon, what do you do? Amar Meimer. Now Meimer says halacha that we mentioned the other day on Lamed Chesed Beis, and we said it's Takakasha, or it's on yesterday's daf. Actually, we had that, I think, right? I remember yesterday's daf Lamed Tes. He said a difficult thing. He said, "Mafka avdo, if you abandon your evet, also evet ein lo takana. He has no remedy. He has no remedy, meaning he's stuck. My time, magufei lakanile. But once you abandon ownership, you don't own him anymore. Isuru dika kabei. What he does is he still has an isur, meaning he's still considered an evet halachically. He's not doesn't belong to you anymore. And but there's still an issue. He has halachas of an evet kani. He's not a full Jew. He's not a guy. Those rules apply. The isur l'matzi maknile. He can't transfer that to his children. So he said, if you're mafkir evet, not to his children. We're not talking here about the children yet. We're talking about l'matzi maknile. He can't transfer it to the evet himself. In other words, he's saying Rav Meir says a big chiddush, which is not what we learned before, and not where we're going to come out. He says, if you're mafkir evet, if you give him a get, fine. If you let him buy himself out, or somebody bought him, fine. Right? Then the other guy owns him. Or if he bought himself, then he gets his freedom. But if you're mafker him, now he's hefker. You have no financial interest in the evet. He's still an evet. How does he get his freedom? He says, you can't. He can't. He can't be maknim b'isur. In other words, the only way to give him his freedom is to give him his financial as well as his isur. As was give him total freedom financially, and that yes, you don't own him, and that he's not an evet anymore. But and that's what a get would do. But if the financial interest is gone, then there's no way to free him. That's what Rav Meir says. And we don't hold that way. We'll see, as we said. Meir Zakasha, I understand. We had this yesterday, the day before. Whether you're makdish an evet according to Rav, or whether you're mafker an evet, even if you're mafker him, you could make him hefker, and he goes out free, but he needs to get shifra because you gave your financial interest out, but you can still give him a get. What's this business that if you don't have a financial interest, you can't give him a get anymore? That's right. That's right. So he's saying, so how does he get out of that? He has a halacha of an evet kanani without having an owner. That's a strange thing. Yeah, he still has a halacha of an evet kanani without having an owner. That's what a maimer says. So therefore, he can't get rid of him, and he can't disband the name evet kanani on him. Yeah.
Why not basically just do the starship?
No, what a maimer saying is right. What a maimer saying is that it gets shifra. No, it's not an issue of who would give it. A maimer saying that he himself can't free him now. The owner himself can't free him. Even if he wants to give him a shecher, it wouldn't work. He says, he needs it. When Ulam Rabbi Yochanan said that if you're mafker your evet, he goes out free and you need to get shecher, you need one, but it won't work. Maimer says a strange thing. We don't hold like that. As we'll see, some say, Amar Maimer, mafka after umeis. Let's say mafka and then you die. Oh, so evet takana. That evet is not takana. My time. Gufei lakani because why? Because he doesn't own him anymore because he gave up his ownership. He was mafkim and then the guy died. He's surdik, but he still has an isra, meaning he has halacha of an evet kanani. The rules of evet kanani apply to him. He's sur lebelei marsin. You can't yarshin. You can't bequeath to your son an isra. You can only bequeath money. Rashi says lashon there. You cannot bequeath something unless it has value to it. Like you can't bequeath an idea. It has to have something about it. Maybe the idea has money too.
Right. He can't bequeath it because he doesn't own him.
No. Right. He doesn't own him anymore, so he doesn't have a financial interest. But there still is an isser that he has that so to speak he's still in a viknani. Well, that you can't yarshin. He doesn't own it, right? He doesn't own. It's not a financial thing that he owns. You only own something that has financial value. right? You don't own, something that doesn't have financial value. Let's say, I don't know, a child. There's no financial value. You can't give it away. You can't give it to somebody else, right? Your own child or something else that has no financial interest. Almost anything you think of has some financial interest. But here we're just talking about the fact that he is an Eved Kanani, that he can't yarshin. He can't bequeath.
He's not here anything. He can't yarshin.
Right. That's right. All you have left here is the fact that he is an Eved Kanani, and as the rules of Eved Kanani, then you can't yarshin. That's what I said. Right, we just started off this page by saying, not in the beginning of the page, but late, about halfway down, a little bit before halfway, what he said. If a man says when he's dying, my shifcha, she's been very nice to me, don't enslave her. You force the kids to give her a get shifra. So here you see, didn't we say that even though he gave up ownership of her, he can give her a shifra? Says Rav Zimi Ta'usu, that was a mistake. Why? As Ravami and Ravasi pointed out, he didn't really give her freedom. He just said, she's been nice to me. You shouldn't enslave her. He didn't say he gave her freedom. He gave her freedom. If he would have said it that way, it would have worked. So even if he would have said, I mashach her, I mafka her, you would have been able to give the kids would have been able, if he would have said, free her, please, then you would have been able to. Ravami obviously said, well, he didn't really say free her. You're not going to give up the kids. He just meant to treat her nicely, fine. But if he had said free her, then it would have worked. The kids could have given her get, so therefore what you said doesn't hold water. Amalei, I'm not going to Shmuel Bar Yehuda really. So Rav Ami will answer, no. I hold like Shmuel Bar Yehuda that he never even said anything about freedom. All he said was treat her nicely. She was satisfied to me. She was satisfied to me. Therefore, you should also give her nice satisfaction. Nothing about freedom. That's all Rav Meir Shapiro. So Meir says a strange thing. He says if you're mafker than Eved, or you just say give or an Eved Kanani or Shabbat, or you say treat her nicely and you should be. I want to give her freedom and you should give her a get shifra. You can't do that. The kids can't do that, and it doesn't mean a get shifra at all. But that goes against what we said before. It's obvious. It goes against what Ula said in Rabbi Yochanan, that whether you're mafker Eved, you still need a get shifra. You could give a get for the Isser. Not like he says, you're right, Yerusha normally is B'dav B'sheish B'mama. So maybe you'll say that, if you're mafka the Eved and then you gave him the guy died, a Meir says ain't not the corner, but we don't hold that way. We hold that you could still give you get shifra. So effectively you could give the rights to divorce, to give him his freedom, that you could give over to the kids. They still own, like you say, he's still the owner. If he's an Eved Kanani, he's an Eved Kanani of somebody. So the kids yarshin that, even though they have no financial interest anymore, he's mafker him, but he can still give him his get shifra. How discarded that there was a little city.
How did there be anal takana before him? Why couldn't somebody else? If he's hefker and he's still in Eved.
If he's hefker, because effectively if you're mafker, he gets his own. He claims himself. That's what we had yesterday. It's about the mafker and Eved. The Eved himself. The question is about. No. He holds because as Rav Meir will state that he's still an Eved Kanani. He's still an Eved Kanani, and
then somebody else can claim.
Somebody else could claim, but he can't get his freedom. Ein lo takana means he's still Eved Kanani. You're right, maybe somebody could claim. Yeah, but takana. But we're not talking. What kind of a takana we're talking about? No takana for his freedom. He means for his freedom, right?
But somebody else
right. He said like a ger shemay said yesterday. A business says a chasav. According to the way we hold, if you hold like that the Gedolim certainly can require themselves. So according, if a guy dies and there's no Yorshma, he gets his own freedom according to the way we hold. A Meir says, no, he's still an Eved.
No, it's just a strange language.
Ain't takana means ain't takana for his freedom.
Usually, ain't takana means he's in this limbo and he can't get around it. But here he's not.
But if somebody would claim it, maybe a Meir, it's not clear what a Meir would hold in that case. Could be a Meir just says ain't takana to get his freedom. That's all. That even though the owner abandoned him, but he's no real abandonment. Unless somebody else claims, it could very well be that financially though. Maybe a Meir may hold that he has no way out because since he abandoned himself, you see, if a ger owned an Eved and the ger died and nobody claimed, he can claim himself. That's what we said yesterday.
Yeah.
He can claim himself. So maybe over here also he can claim himself, but he's still an Evet Kanani. That's what a Maimer would say. Therefore, he's always going to be stuck as an Evet Kanani because he owns himself now. He owns himself.
Yeah,
Nobody can claim him because he's not like a Hefker item on the street. He claimed himself now. But so he's in limbo.
But he doesn't have.
And since he doesn't have an owner, he can. It's like somebody gave him money on the condition that the owner has no reshus over it. So therefore, he owns it himself, and yet he can't get out of his freedom. That's what a Maimer says. We don't hold that way.
He could sell himself.
We would sell.
He owns himself.
Yeah, he could sell himself. Right? He could do that. Yeah, he could do that. But he doesn't have any regular remedy. And the way we're talking here, there's no remedy to get him out of this situation. Unless you say something, but it's not clear what a Maimer would hold.
Yeah.
A Maimer L'chor would say that he still has the rules of an Evet Kanani. Could somebody else acquire him? Not so simple, right? You could say, you can't acquire me, I own myself. How would this guard to David? There was a city of Evet Kananis. This David they had a whole village there of Avadim Kananim. I guess they had a little village there that the Jews owned. And they sold the whole village, including the Avadim, to Goyim. The later owners, the Goyim died. They all died out. Also came Ravina, came for Ravina. Amalu, what should we do with these guys? So go after the original owners who sold the Goyim, those Avadim. Get the chus and let them ride against Pharaoh. Let them give them their freedom. What are you going to do with these guys now? In other words, they were sold to Goyim. So you really don't own them anymore. You don't own them anymore, right? Because you sold them out. Now those people died out, and now you have these Avadim Knanim who are in limbo. So give them again. He just said that if there's no owner, there's no remedy. I hold like Rav Dimi, who said that if the father on his deathbed said, "These are not the Shifra Kanas was nice to me, you should not enslave her." Related to Ravami Tahusi, that was a mistake. It was a mistake because, like Ravami and Ravasi pointed out, he didn't really grant it. He didn't say give them freedom. He just said, don't enslave her too hard. Because he didn't say Lashon Shikra. He didn't say actually free her. He just said be nice to her. But he said Lashon Shikra Kanabi. It would have worked. So even though you've given up ownership already because you sold these Avadim, right? Same thing as abandoning them, like being mafker, you could still give them the freedom. That's the halacha, that you could free them anyway. In other words, you could free them. And apparently, if they die, if the owners died and it went to their children, the children could also grant them the freedom. And we don't say She'ein Yerusha, like Rashi said, according to Meir, She'ein Yerusha Ela B'davar Sheish Bo Moment. Yerusha could be even this kind of an issue too. Even if you don't really own the slave anymore for work for you, but you still own, you have his so to speak, his deed, and you can free him.
Does it get shipped or need agent or anything?
Good question. It's not a davar shebe'erva, so l'chor it wouldn't.
I'm trying to figure. There's
No,
so
and
many
I'll tell you,
questions.
we're gonna see an answer. It's a good question. We're gonna see the answer on Amud Beis. You wouldn't need Adam because the reason why you need Adam by davar shebe'erva because we learn a davar meaning mammon, and mammon needs to it. A monetary thing needs money. But here this is monetary, but we're not talking about the monetary aspect of it. We're talking about let's say he's mafgrim, so he doesn't have ownership in it anymore.
So
You still need for the Isser part. Do you need it? We'll see about that. The horror you don't. Okay. Bahu Abda the Beit Shrei. It was never belonged to two Jewish men. So one of the partners freed his half of the slave. So this is your famous case of a person who's half an Eved, half a Ben Chorim. And what's the halacha there? He can't marry anybody. He can't marry Shifra Knanis because of the part that he's a full Jew, the part that he's Jewish. And the part that he's an Eved Knani prevents him from marrying a regular Jewess. So what do? So the rabbis force the other partner to free him, and he has to pay him back what his worth was. He gives him an IOU for his value. Okay, Amr Ida, so the other partner who had not freed him said, Hashta Shemi by Rabbana, and the Rabbana are going to hear what's happened, that I now own a half an Eved, right? Half the Eved is free, and half the guy is free, and half the guy belongs to me. And they're going to force me to free him, right? Because the guy can't marry anybody. So he wanted to get around the rabbis, and he gave his half to his young child, figuring the young child, you can't take it away from him. They can't force the child. The child is not empowered to free him. Shalch Rabbi Yosef Brei the Rabba, so Rabbi Yosef Brei the son of Rabba, they come to Papa, what are we going to do about this case? Here we have a man who tried to get around our usual edict. Let's say the kid's 5 years old, and this poor guy cannot marry anybody. He's half an Evan, half a free man. Shalach Lei, so Papa answered, Kasher also Ken Yasalo, like he did, so will we do to him. Okay, so will be to him. Mulo Yashiv Lo. His payment will be returned in kind. Yashiv Lo Barosho. In other words, what he's done, he's tried to get around the rabbis, we'll pay him back. Anan Kim Lumbi says, we know that young children, let's say he gave his 5-year-old son, he gave him ownership of the half heaven, right? Of the half heaven. So he says, you know how to get around kids. You shake dangle a few coins or candies in front of them, and they'll agree to anything. So Mukmila Petrupus, they set up a guardian for the child, despite the father was alive, right? The father was here. Set up a guardian for the child. The rabbis did that. That's what the Bezin can do. And they dangled some money in front of the child because of like get the Decharusa. And they wrote a get of freedom on behalf of the child, Al Shmei, on the name of the child, and gave it and basically affected his freedom. In other words, Bezin said, you try to get around us because the kid can't do anything. We're going to set up a guardian who's going to act in the interests of the child, and the child will then give the Eved his freedom, even though a child is he empowered to do that? This is well what the children do. Metalton is considered done. For example, if a child goes, you send your kid to the Makola to buy a loaf of bread, and he buys a loaf of bread. Is that done? Well, Menat Torah is not bar mitzvah. His actions don't mean anything. But the rabbi said, so that you can have regular commerce and for the benefit of society, we'll let children do with metalton. Tosa says, yeah, but this isn't metalton. This is an Eved, which is like karka. So Tosa says it's not that the child grants the kid his freedom, it's that the apotropos is empowered by the Bezdin to give the guy his freedom, the apotropos on behalf of the child. Tosa says that makes more sense. The cotton, Shane Meiser cotton klum. He can't. The cotton, what are you saying over here? You have an Eved who's half an Eved, half a free man. He can't marry anybody. And this 5-year-old is giving him his freedom and enabling the Eved to get married because now he's a full Jew and he can marry a Jewess. He doesn't have that kind of power, but the apotropos does. Right? So it says that he says they could do things. That's by money matters. After best nefti. Here we're talking about Yisr. So he says he got to shmei the apotropos. Whereas when the Gemara says on the second line of the Gemara, because I get to al shmei, not on the name of the child, but the name of the apotropos. The apotropos. Why is that?
He's losing money.
He's losing money, yeah, but he's not losing money because the takon of the chachamim in that case, if let's say you have is that the Eved has to pay back his value. In other words, if the owner owns an Eved who's half free and half a slave, you force the owner to give him his freedom, but the slave has to give him an IOU. Then when he gets money, he'll pay him back his value. So here we do presumably he did the same thing. In other words, Rav Papa said, well, an act of law will assign a guardian to a man. Sometimes, even though the man's alive and has faculties, the rabbis could do that. Bezin could do. They set up a guardian to act on to follow the rules of the Chum, because this man did something illegal because he went against our rulings. Our rulings are that you should free him and let him give you an IOU, and you try to get around it. Well, we'll pay you back in kind. Again, but you see that you have to give him his freedom. And first of all, you could give him his freedom even if you're after him, and you have to give him freedom. Let's say a man says that he writes this down, according to what Rashi learns, he writes this down in the shtar. I've made this guy a free man. That's good enough. Even though he didn't say Harayat, Ben Chorin, he just said, I have made him Ben Chorin, Asu Ben Chorin, Harehu Ben Chorin. Let's say he's free now. Harehu Ben Chorin. That's also a words of freedom that he can write again. Harehu Ben Chorin. Esenu Ben Chorin. He said, I'm going to make him a Chorin. Rebbe Omer Kana. The Chum say that's not Kana. The Chum say that's not Kana because I liken it to a case when a guy gets up and says, in front of people, says, you know what? I'd like to thank so and so for this good job that he did. So thank him. What do you mean? I'd like to thank him. I'd like to means you didn't do it. You would like to, so do it. that's lashon of, we that people talk that way. But when you think about what he said, I like to thank him. So thank him. What's preventing you from thanking him? That's what he's saying over here too. B'chum say, Senu ben Chorin, Rabbi says that, that's also the same thing. I'd like to make him free. I'd like to grant us freedom. B'chum say, no, you didn't actually do it in that case. That's what you wrote in the star. He wrote not in the star that it was enough that you're going to write a star now. He wrote those words in the star. Asisi ben Chorin, Hareu ben Chorin, or I'm going to make him a Senu ben Chorin, the only star. Only the last one, Rabbi Yochanan, the all star, but Chum say the last one doesn't work. Similarly, by a field, son of Plonis, I gave this particular field to this guy. If you wrote that, it's a star matana. I have given it to him. It's like saying I have given it to him with this document. Harei Shalo, it belongs to the other guy. Harei Shalo, also, or Nena Leploni, or I'm going to give it to him. Rav Meir says, what's the gears over here? Takes that Rav Meir. Rebbe Omer, kind of a humlo kind, just like we had before. Rebbe says that acquired in the last one. In other words, if he says Nasat is Leploni, Harei Shalo, at Nena Leploni, but if he says I'm going to give it, I'd like to give this to him, but you're not giving it to him yet. I'd like to give it to him. Rebbe says, the same idea. Homer Sisi Plani Abdi. Listen to this, Michael. This maybe will answer your question. Homer Sisi Plani Abdi. I said I have already given him his freedom. I gave him again a freedom. He says, no, you never gave I never got my freedom. You never granted it to me. Maybe transferred to him to a third party. After all, we assume that it's a schus for the guy. David Kani would rather be free than be a slave. So maybe I gave his freedom. I gave Yankel his freedom. I gave it to Yankel on his behalf. He could be zachet for him, and therefore he's free. As I say, I freed this guy, and the guy says, "No, you didn't do it. You didn't give me my freedom." We assume that he gave it to him through somebody else. Because safti ben asati lo. Let's say he says, I wrote it and I gave it to him. Low cost of leave If he says I wrote him a star and I gave it to him, and he says, no, you never gave me anything. If he says not through a third person, I wrote this get shiur and I gave it to him, and he says, no, I never got anything from you. If he says I'm not free, This is basically it's a combination of isur and financial, but he says clearly I'm still financially yours. So das badin made him dummy. When it comes to money matters, if a guy says I have 100 Adam that you paid me back, you don't owe me anything, and the guy says no, I never paid you. Das badin made him dummy. It's like 100 Adam that I owe the money. Let's say I gave this field to Yankel. It says, you didn't give it to me. Maybe you gave it to him through, maybe I gave it to him via a third party. So that therefore it belongs to the other guy. Let's say I wrote it and I gave it to him. I gave him the star matana. Made him dummy. Okay. Okay, so if he's motive, the person, in other words, what happens? Reuben says, I gave the field to Shimon. I gave it to him. I wrote him a star matana. I gave it to him. Maybe he lost now, but I gave it to him. And Shimon says, no, you never gave it to me. So, Reuben says it's yours. Shimon says, no, it's yours. So what do you do?
How old is she?
Miochel Paris. Who eats the Paris? So Chista Amar, no sin Ochel Paris. Says the guy who gave it eats the Paris because Shimon says he never gave it to me. So you leave it where it is. The Chazaka is, it was in Reuben's Rishus. Rabba Amar Mishal Shon is a Paris. No, you give it to a third party. In other words, let him store it, let him sell it, and keep the money in limbo, in escrow. Are we speaking about the father himself, right? If the Makawatan is still alive, if Shimon's still alive, and he says, you didn't give it to me, he's believed, and the no saying gives the payros. In other words, leave it where it was. He's believed to say, you never gave me anything, you didn't give me my freedom, whatever. In this case, where it was a field with produce, etc. So you leave it in the hands of Reuben, the giver. He was a muhsik in it. Shimon says, I never got it, you never gave me anything. But let's say he died. Let's say Shimon died, and now you're dealing with his son, and the son says, "No, you never gave my father anything." Then you put it in escrow because maybe Adam will come and say, maybe we'll be able to prove later on that the father actually did give it to Shimon. But what do you see from over here? That why don't you just say ask the Adam? If you find the Adam, maybe you'll say you didn't find the Adam, but it's not mashma. The Gemara is saying about that will confirm it Ayidei Masira or anything like that, right? It's not done. There's no discussion over here about Eideh Chasim or Eideh Masira. It's not mashma that you have to have any of that. So all he has to do is give him his freedom by get shechra, even by get isha. If he wrote it himself, that's good enough too. It works. We hold Eideh Masira karti. And
you compare this to the earlier cases we had about if he marries his slave, right? We assume that he
granted the freedom before. Right. Where's the proof? Yeah. Where's the proof? Yeah.
We don't hear that here. The guy says at least I gave it.
Right.
Here we don't even ask.
That's right. But he said the other guy says he never gave me anything.
Yeah,
if he says
in the earlier case with the
in the earlier case, yeah, he says I gave it to him. Right. We assume that he gave it already. No. He's saying that even if he says he gave it, we're talking about even if he says I gave it to him already, I gave him the freedom. We assume that that's good enough. But he said, if you would ask him, maybe maybe he didn't get a chance to ask him. He gave it to her, and then he died. And there's a question about the Yerusha or kids or whatever the thing was. Do we assume that there's a get there or not? If he would say he did, and if you ask him and they both agreed, then apparently there wouldn't be any discussion about it. Correct. Evet Shasa Rabba says the Mishnah, and Evet Kanani, who his master designated as being a collection point, meaning let's say Reuben owns an Evet, and he says to Shimon, "Listen, you lent me $1,000. If I don't pay you back, you can come and take the Evet." Apotiki is like an abbreviation, an acronym for saying Apote Koi. He is right on this. You can come and he is here, and you could take him. Apote Koi. He is here as like a collateral. Come and take the Evet. He said that to Shimon. The Shichro, and he freed him. Who freed him? So the first lashon of the Gemara is going to be that Reuven, after he designated him as a collection, collect him, he's my collateral, right? He's the mortgage. He's the lien over here on this loan. Then afterwards he freed him before the loan was paid back. Sure, said the truth is, so what's going on now? He freed the slave. The slave's no longer a slave. The freed slave is now free. He's a free man. Can't take me. The truth is, Shura said then, the letter of the law, the evidence is not chayiv anything. Because of the betterment of society, for the sake of society, kofin es rabov osos and chorin. In other words, simply, for the benefit of society, we'll say, you know what? We force his master osos and chorin. What do you mean, master? We already said that his master freedom. So we'll see that with Lashon, which master we're talking about. The first, the Gemara that we'll see today says the second master also writes from Ben Chorim. Now, why does he write Ben Chorim? The first master already freed him, and as we'll see, because it's a shibud, Shiur takes away a shibud. The second master also writes him again. We'll see why. Because of Shtar al Dama, and then the slave himself, again, because of benefit of society, writes him an IOU. That he'll pay him back for his value, unless he has the money right now. Shimon Gamliel Omer, ain't a kos v'ela m'shacher. No, Shimon Gamliel says no. He doesn't write him ela m'shacher, but rather what? He just grants him his freedom. What do we mean by that? And kos m'shacher, that meaning the Evet doesn't write the IOU. The m'shacher, the first master, right? The first master, meaning Reuben, he has to write the IOU because he's the one who cheated Shimon. Right? Reuben said, if I don't pay you back, you collect this Evet. Then Reuben went and freed the Evet. So basically the Evet's free. Okay, so who lost out over here? Shimon, right? Lost out. So you say, right? He lost his mashkan. So, but Tikkun Olam, we force Shimon, you know what? What's the Tikkun Olam? We'll see in the Gemara in a minute. Shimon also has to write him a writ of freedom. And the slave writes him an IOU. Shmuel says, no, not the slave writes the IOU. The first guy, Reuben, should write the IOU. Who freedom over here? It says, so the first answer that we'll see today is, Amarav Rabba Rishon. The first man, Reuben freedom. Sure, said the letter of the law says, Ein Evet Chayiv Klum L'Rabbo Shein. He's not chayiv, and he could rub them Rabba Hektish Chametz B'Shich Mafkim Neshibut. Let's say you say you can collect the cow. If I don't pay you back, and then you're makdish the cow. The cow hektish takes away the shibud. It's halacha mashmi sinai. Chametz, right? If I tell a guy, lend me $1,000 and you can collect my storehouse of bread. I got a ton of bread, a whole barn full of bread, a whole warehouse full of bread. You can collect that after Pesach. What happens to chametz on Pesach? it's worthless, right? Can't have enough from it after Pesach, Chametz Shalva Pesach, unless he gave it to the guy in advance, and so the guy's rishus. But if he gave it to him, Chametz takes away the shibud. V'shichur, freeing an Eved also takes away the shibud. That's why, even though Reuben didn't do a nice thing, but the Eved himself is not meshubad, is not obligated to be enslaved to Shimon. Elam, they tikkun olam. What's the tikkun olam? Benefit of society. Shemi and Meshuk. What'll happen is like this. How does Shimon feel over here? Cheated, right? He feels that the Eved really belongs to him, right? When Reuben didn't pay back the loan. Maybe he'll see him in the shuk. Biomelo, and Shimon will say to the Eved, Avdiato, you're my slave. And Rashi says, and people will think that his kids aren't really Jews because it's or they'll be, if you hold that Eved above the kids can mamzer, they're not really mamzer the way the halacha is, but there's such a sheet of Yochanan and Yevamis, but certainly his kids will be tainted as being the sons of Avadim. So because they're Kofanis Rabashani, therefore we force now Shimon, both sons of Mechan, gives him his freedom also, because if Eved, and the Eved writes a star al damav, either the Eved, if he happens to have some money, he could pay his value now to Shimon, because Shimon deserves getting his money back, or gives him an IOU. Shimon Leil says, ain't Eved kosef, el Meshachar kosef. Not the Eved doesn't have Meshachar kosef. Mike, what's a machlokas here between the Tanakos, between the Chachamim and when you damage somebody else's lien, right? Reuben damaged Shimon's lien on the Eved. Marsav Chayev, Marsav Potter, right? The Shmuel says you're Chayev. You damaged him, you have to pay for it. You should write the IOU. Reuben, Marsav Potter, and the Tanakhama says no. You damaged the lien. You're not a nice guy. Potter Avalasser, of course, you shouldn't do it, but you don't have to pay. Therefore, the Eved is the one who writes the IOU. All right, we'll pick from here tomorrow. Another way to learn the Mishnah.